Sarah here. This is just a short video to introduce you to 3 of my favourite yoga poses to help you keep those hips nice and mobile. You will need a couple of blocks, possibly a pillow, although a block can work just as well, and a yoga strap. So I'll let you collect all those and I will see you on. Right, okay, let's get started. So the first pose we're going to do is supple and this is a great pose for both your hips and your legs, and you'll also work your core a little bit as well. So we're going to need a strap for this one, and I'd like you to make a loop. So make sure that the strap is nice and smooth, and then you're going to take the strap under both D-rings, come over the top of one of them, and then under the other. And of course, if you're well experienced at making loops, you just go ahead and do so. You want a loop that's about the size of your foot. Okay, so it doesn't have to be exact. And then get yourself down on the floor. And you may want to grab a block as well as we do this one. So the first thing I want you to find before we go any further is a neutral pelvis. And this is really important because if you do this with the neutral pelvis, then you get the most benefit out of the pose. So to find a neutral pelvis, place your hands on top of your pelvis. And I just want you to do a few tucks and tilts. Okay, so we're basically going from one extreme to another. And if you're anything like me, you may find one direction a little bit easier than the other, but it's not a hard and fast rule at all. So once you've done a few, we want to find the midpoint. Okay, so what I quite like to think about is imagining your pelvis like a clock, and I discovered this from another amazing teacher. Fuck's sake, Sarah, didn't mean to do that. Oh, start again. Ballsing this up. I will get it done. Right. Okay, so the first pose we're going to do is a pose called supple. And for this one, we're going to need our strap. And I would like to invite you to make a loop for the foot. So if you've never done one before, I'll quickly go through it. Smooth out your strap, so no kinks basically. And then you're going to pop them underneath the D-ring. Come over the top of one and then under the other, and just create a loop which is big enough for your foot. And then we'll come to a lying down position. I've got a block nearby. You might not need one, but sometimes it's quite nice to have, and I'll show you what you can do with it so you can decide if it's right for you. So come down to lying, and for this pose we need to find a neutral pelvis, and this will help us get the most out of the pose. So to help you find yours, place the heel of your hands on your hips and the fingers towards your pubic bone, and just tuck and tilt the pelvis a few times. What we're aiming for is to find a point where the fingers are level with the heel of your hand. And once you've kind of get a sense of that spot, just find some stillness. So once you've got it, you should have a little bit of a little gap under your lower back. So you don't want to be smashing your lower back into the floor. All right. So from here, we're going to try and keep that neutral pelvis throughout the whole of this pose, which is not easy, but I'll keep reminding you. So hold on to it as you lift the right foot. We're going to take the strap, by my loop now, and we're going to place it around the ball of the foot. So you want to get it on the little toe mount and the big toe mount. And then we're going to stretch our leg into the air. Now, if you've got tight hamstrings, you can have a little bend in the leg, that's absolutely fine, or you can have the stretch down here. What's important is that you don't lose that neutral pelvis, okay? And this might happen as you pull the leg in, or if you've got any tightness in your hamstring, as you draw the leg this way, your tailbone's going to want to come off the floor, so lengthen it down. Keep that evenness between the hip and your pubic bone. Alright, so from here we're going to start to stretch the hamstring. So this is the first part of the move. Try and soften the backs of your arms down into the floor, so you're not scrunching up. And relax the arms, try not to hold too much tension in the arms. We're just basically drawing the foot towards the shoulder, keeping that pelvis nice and neutral. Now, you can stay here, or there's an option to slide the left leg more if you want to. Now, with this, reach through the toes and roll the inner leg down. Okay, that will help you keep the pelvis in neutral as well. Now, another thing to watch out for is your head. We want the chin to be perpendicular to the floor, so you don't want to be tilting up or far too down. So if you need to make any adjustments with the blanket, then please do. Pause the video, come back, just make sure you are comfortable. All right, so we'll hold this for a few more breaths so you can get a feel for it. So you're going to get a nice stretch in the back of the hamstring and the back of the hip, and a stretch. If you're stretching out this part, this leg, you're going to get a stretch at the front of the hip here. Alright, so from there we're going to move on to the second part of this move, which is to take the leg out to the side. Now, before I get going, what I like to do is to turn my leg bone out from the top of the core of the pelvis. This just helps me to lower the leg. Alright, so again, as we lower the leg, you want to keep the pelvis neutral. So we're going to take the leg straight out to the side. You can land on your right arm as you go. I put my left hand on top of my left hip to remind me not to let my hip come off the floor. So you should be getting a nice stretch in the inner leg and a little bit in the inner groin. Now, it's really easy to overshoot this one. So don't let your ego get in the way. It doesn't matter how low that leg gets. Go to a point where you're feeling the stretch and this hip is on the floor. Now, what you can do with your block, and you'll see it better on the second side, is to use the block to sandwich the space between the floor and your leg. Okay, this just helps your hips release a little bit more, to be honest, than rather letting your leg hang out in mid-air. So I quite like that version, and it also enables me to push down in the legs a little bit more, which helps to open up the inner leg. Alright, I'm going to take the leg back up, and then for the next one, I'm going to take the leg over to the opposite side. So we need to swap hands with the bell. Now I'm going to show you two versions and they're both groovy stretches. You can do them both or one at a time. So I'm going to actually take my loop so it's more on my heel for this first variation. I'm going to reach it back up, make sure that I'm pretty square in my hips again, and my pelvis is in neutral. And then I'm going to hold the belt in my left hand. Sometimes I put my right hand on the top of my right leg bone, so the leg that's stretched up towards the ceiling, and just push away a bit, and that helps keep the pelvis nice and level as well. And then we're just going to draw the heel towards the left shoulder. Now the movement, as you can see, I'm hardly moving, okay? So it's like a diagonal pull. And if you get this right, you're going to feel an amazing stretch around the outer right hip, all the way down the outer thigh, maybe all the way down to your heel. Now what you must try not to do is lift your right buttock off the floor. Root the sit bone down. So sit bone roots down as you draw the heel towards your left shoulder. Breathe, relax your jaw. Sometimes your jaw can get a bit tense, so let it go, let it relax. Alright, okay, and then the third one is we're going to take the strap back around the ball of the foot. You're going to shift your hips slightly to the right. And this again, you may need your block here. And we're going to take the legs straight over to the left. Now, you probably realise as we do it that you're coming into a twist. Now, keep both legs super long. So you're reaching through the toes of your left leg, the heel of your right. Take your right arm out to help you soften both shoulder blades on the floor. And then you're gently pulling up with the strap. And you're going to get a similar stretch to the last one. It's the outer hip area that's getting a nice lengthen. Now I pop the block underneath my leg, okay, because that feels nice for me. Don't need to use a block at all, but like I said earlier, sometimes the hips release better when they're not hanging in mid-air. Alright, okay, release, come back, take the strap off and just lengthen both legs just for a moment. And you may notice that one leg feels longer than the other. So let's sort that out by doing the other side. So strap around the ball of the foot, going to stretch it up towards the ceiling. The other leg's bent just to begin with. Make sure your pelvis is in neutral, and then we'll move into the stretch. And you may notice that there's a difference between the two sides, and you know that's pretty normal for all of us. Take a few breaths, stretching out the back of the leg. And you can do whatever breath suits you. You can just do that nice abdominal breathing, or ujjayi breathing is quite nice here, where you close the back of the throat. Alright, lovely. So you'll be able to see better this side. Sorry, I forgot. You could, you've got the option of straightening out the other leg. So I'll just show you here. So we're reaching the toes forward, rolling the inner leg down towards the floor. Alright. Release, and then I'm going to move on to the inner leg stretch. So I'm just going to turn the leg bone out slightly and then take it straight out to the side. You can see my upper arm is landing, and then if I want to, I can use my block as a little landing pad. Okay, and you can play around with the height, see what works for you. Remember, this opposite hip needs to be on the floor. So if you find that it's lifting, you've gone too far, just take it back a bit. Relax your jaw, relax both shoulders into the floor. We're stretching out the inner leg, the inside of the hip. All right, come on out. And then slide the belt down so it's on your heel, or near enough. Make sure that the left sit bone is glued to the floor, and then we're just pulling across and towards the right shoulder. So again, now stretch all the way up this part of your leg, outer hip. So again, this is kind of a nice but uncomfortable, nice stretch, if that makes sense. So do watch your breath, make sure you don't stop breathing. And then, last but not least, take the strap back onto the ball. Shift the hips and your block maybe over to the right, and then take the left arm out. You're rolling onto the little pinky side of that leg on the floor, coming into a nice twist, outer hip stretch. We'll take one more breath here. And release. Remove the strap. Stretch out both legs, give them a little wiggle. Hopefully they're the same length now. And then we'll move on to second pose, which is Virasana. And I'm going to show you a few variations. Variation 1, take the feet apart. Or actually, variation 1, just come into a kneeling position with your feet under the bottom. Okay, that's one variation. Another variation is to take the feet apart, move the chunky bit of your calves outwards, and then sit back on the floor. And that gives you a nice stretch along the front of the thighs. A little bit more intensive than the last one, but a nice variation. Another variation is to pop yourself on a block. Okay, so same stretch, but you're sitting on a block, and that just eases it out a little bit, so you've got less of a stretch. So do play around with that variation, with or without a block, feet together or feet apart. You can increase the intensity by coming into what we call supple Virasana, which is a lying down variation. So I'm going to show you a version with blocks. You're going to come into the position with your feet apart. Place one block underneath your shoulders and one block underneath your head. And then you can rest here, thinking about driving the knees forward and down towards the front of your mat. Now, this variation is slightly stronger than the upright variations I just showed you. And then if you want more, okay, final variation, remove the block. You can keep one hand for your head if you like, but you're coming all the way down. And this is the strongest variation. And with this, we're stretching the front of the hips. We don't get a lot of that in the last pose. We get a bit with the straight leg, but this just is a beautiful pose for really hitting the front of the thighs and the hip flexors. Now to get a little bit more, think about pressing the toes down as you press the knees down. And just like with the other pose, we are trying to find that nice neutral pelvis. So play around with it here, and even in the upright versions as you breathe and hold the pose. Okay, we'll take a couple more breaths here. And then to come up, I like to push down with my arms, bring myself up, stretch my legs back out in front, and give them a shake. Right, final pose, pigeon pose. And keep your blocks handy, or this is where the pillow might come useful as well. So bring yourself into all fours. And again, this is where the neutral pelvis comes in once again. We'll slide the left leg in first, just so you can see how I position my front leg. So slide it in towards your left palm, and then just take the foot towards the right side of the mat. Now, whatever you do, don't use your right hand to pull it forward. Just let it go where it wants to go. Then, caterpillar the right toes as far back as you can. All right. Now from here, you want to flex the front foot. That will help keep your knee happy. And then just like we did with the first pose, with the back leg, think about rolling the inner leg up towards the ceiling. All right, so it's still that rolling in sensation, but because we're the other way around, we're rolling it up towards the ceiling. And then once you've got as far as you can, then we start to hold the pose and breathe into it. Now, for many of us, when we have a look and try and keep our pelvis level, we may find in that effort to get the front butt cheek down towards the floor, our pelvis gets a bit ski with. So this is where the pillow comes in use, and I quite like the pillow because it's soft. And we can use it to sandwich the space between the back hip and the floor, and then of course we can come and fold into it from here. And of course you can stay upright as well if it feels comfortable. Another thing you can do is place a block there, okay? And what I find sometimes is that when you place a block there, it makes the other side drop down, so you become a little bit more skew with. So what is handy is to place a block underneath the other leg as well. Okay, and you may have to play around with the height. Okay, so I still feel a little bit skew with both blocks, so I'm actually going to get rid of it and go back to my pillow because I feel the most symmetrical here, but it's a good idea to play around and see which works. So let's take a few breaths in our finished position once you've got there. And another tip, while you're holding it, think about pulling the front hip back in space, like you're trying to suck the leg bone into the core of the pelvis. And then think about dropping the back hip down towards the floor, okay? And keep rolling the inner leg of your straight leg up towards the ceiling. And by doing this, you're actively trying to keep the pelvis as level as possible. All right, come on up. Let's try the other side so you can see the straight leg. Coming back to all fours, and then we're going to slide the right knee into or towards the right hand. Take the other leg out, and then shimmy the left toes back. Okay, and again, you might notice the difference on both sides. So, use your props to give you a hand to help you find that symmetry in your pelvis. Start pulling the front hip back or sucking the front leg bone back into the core of the pelvis. We're rolling the inner leg of your back leg up towards the ceiling and dropping the hip down, and then you can come into your pose. And just so you can see from this side, because it wouldn't have been very clear, if you like the idea of a block supporting you on that side, pop it under the thigh. And just make sure that whatever you're using on the opposite side is keeping your pelvis as level as possible. And it's quite useful to have a mirror because then you can really feel and see what is going on in your pelvis. Alright, just remove that now. Take a few more breaths wherever your comfortable, happy place is. And this is stretching and mobilising the whole of your hip area. This is an amazing pose for keeping your hips super happy and healthy. Alright, and then bring yourself out. Remove your props. So I hope you enjoyed that little tutorial on those 3 poses. If you do all of them, you will definitely mobilise and stretch the whole of your hip area, as well as get some work for the core and also some work for the legs as well. So I hope you enjoyed practice them, and I will look forward to seeing you next time on the mat.